Red detective.
Ancient sands, heed my command.
You know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning?
And reclaim these relics of
I think I'm kinda gay.
Morphin time!
Kinda gay.
Same thing that happens to everything else.
If the apocalypse comes, beat me, beat me, beat me, beat me, beat me.
Mega level Red detective.
Ancient sands, heed my command.
You know what happens to a toad when it's struck by
Why won't it stop? Welcome to Real Hot Nerd Shit, a pop culture podcast where real hot nerds talk about real nerd shit. I'm your host, Ryan.
And I'm your co-host, Shana.
And on this episode of Real Hot Nerd Shit, we are talking about the Lord of the Rings franchise, specifically the Two Towers, in our theme of What's Your Fantasy?
And to that, we have our special guest hot nerd for this episode, Christine. So welcome to our podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. My whole life has led to this moment, actually.
Coincidentally enough, same. I can't wait to talk about the Lord of the Rings, just experience that we all had. I can't wait to find the similarities. But before we do that, we realize that we all have multiple nerd identities, right? So we could be nerdy about fashion, about Lord of the Rings, all these things. But we think of a nerd as someone who is weirdly knowledgeable and passionate about something that people sometimes find uncool. So, Christine, what are you a nerd about?
It's pretty much everything that nerd culture embraces. So Star Wars, the MCU, old school Pokemon, so many things, Lord of the Rings, obviously. And then more generally, I just love movie trivia, movies and TV. I memorize actors' names and faces like it's my job, and it's really weird sometimes for people, I think. So many things. Books lately I've been trying to as an adult get more into books. I used to be in reading Olympics and all of that stuff, but as an adult completely fell off. So trying to get more into books too. So yeah, that's the general overview.
I love it. Okay, great. You're in great company. We're going to get along famously.
So as you were saying, that this is actually what kind of brought our podcast together, was this kind of same shared interest, and where we realized we had so many different overlapping intersections of nerdery, and we should talk about it because we love talking to each other about it. And so now here we are talking to you, talking to all of you, whomst ever may be out there.
What I just found out, Christine, that I don't think I knew, is that the connection between the two of you is Dodgeball.
It is, yes. I've known Shana for a long time through Dodgeball. I only started playing a couple years ago, but I've seen Shana play and dominate for years now.
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah. Where are you located again? West Coast?
East Coast, right outside of Philly.
Oh, nice. Okay. And are you on competitive teams? Do you play in a league?
Yes, I do. We are competitive. We keep it light though. We're just more of a fun vibes team, and we're competitive as well. But
you could arguably say that you're just happy to be there, and
right, we are often just happy to be there, and so that's my team name. Just happy to be here. So that gives you an idea of the vibe.
Coincidentally enough, I'm wearing the Christmas present that Shana got me that is the inspiration for our dodgeball team name. It says Down the Witch's Road, from obviously Agatha All Along. And our team name is Dodge the Witch's Throw. And we are premiering this Sunday, which I'm so excited about.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
We finally get to get back into the courts.
Our little local Stonewall Sports League, and it's always a fun time, and it's also that same kind of just light, happy just to honestly, because it's just fun to be playing a game with your friends. And I always love that perspective that you and your team bring, because I think it's so important to remember we are adults playing a game and it should be fun.
That's right.
And I think I love that personally, and it's kind of that same energy that I always want to bring. And so I was yes, I'm always very here for that kind of perspective. And, I think there always needs to be more of that. So Yeah,
Yeah, I feel like it brings us together, and there's a lot of camaraderie when we think about it like that. And at the end of the day, we're just a bunch of friends who like to play
Yeah.
dodgeball together. So putting it into perspective is nice.
Always. And like,
absolutely.
the competitiveness, you can still be in community with people and also competitive. Like, you don't have to be actively trying to cause harm to be competitive. Like, I just want to win and I want to win with my friends, but I don't think I need to, you know, terrify the opponents like with threats of physical violence in order to, get that accomplished. But dodgeball is a really tricky sport to hold those two truths simultaneously
Yeah.
because of the nature of how competition comes out in all of us. Like it does have a tendency to bring out some of our least favorable characteristics.
Well, and especially with dodgeball being such an honesty-based sport, that there's such that kind of personal, like, ethics that whether you realize it or not in a moment, we're like, oh, like all of those kinds of things, it really kind of helps, bring that to you.
Yeah.
Like,
You're
so yeah,
so
I
right.
think that's such a fun part of it. But I think that's fun too, is that like I always say that honesty is a skill, and it's a skill you can practice every time you step on the court.
Yeah,
100%.
that's why Shauna's the captain.
That's right.
So it's our first dodgeball season, or it's our first dodgeball game of 2025 this Sunday. This is also our first recording session of 2025. Happy New Year! We made it. We still have a couple more weeks before the world ends, but speaking of the world ending, let's talk about some just current events things, and I'm actually very excited, Christine, to hear your perspective because Shauna and I have already talked about this. I am a big Storm fan from the X-Men. Aurora Monroe is my numero uno X-Men, number one character in all of the Marvel Universe. I have a huge tattoo of her on my thigh. I have a small collection of different Storm figures on my display. And people are now talking about this clip that went viral of Cynthia Erivo, the Broadway star, and now star of Wicked as Elphaba, saying that her next dream role is Storm. I'm gonna hold my thoughts, but I'm curious, Christine. What's your first take on it? Have you seen this?
So when you were chatting about it before the show was the first time I had actually heard it, which is weird because I'm pretty online, so I can't believe I missed this. But I love Cynthia Erivo. I think what she did with Elphaba was incredible. Obviously, I've been very Wicked pilled lately, so I'm fully into it. But yeah, I think just Storm in general, I think in the live action films especially, has never had a chance to really shine as much as she should, and I just want that for her. So the more hype this gets and the more we put our faith in somebody who I think can bring the power behind Storm, which I think Cynthia Erivo can, the better, in my opinion. I'm super excited. I just want to know more and support it
Yeah,
as much as possible.
that's fair. I don't think I really thought about the the power that we've seen Cynthia Erivo display and how that could translate really well to Storm. I am of the mindset right now, I want all new people. I want no
Yeah.
name actors and
Mm.
actresses to take up the mantle. I don't want to compare. I don't want to, I would like something fresh. And I think there are a couple of like existing actors or just people in general. Jodie Turner Smith, who is just like this absolutely stunning woman who I think has the regality of Storm, but I don't know anything about her chops, like if she acts or whatever. I just know her name. Um, but it just feels very like Cynthia is on everyone's lips as she deserves to be, rightfully so. Everyone should be talking about her. I just It feels a little like lazy is the wrong word, but I just think there's another person who is perhaps Kenyan in origin that might be a little more on kind of just something, a different perspective.
Mhm.
I'm cool with
Mm.
Cynthia, um,
Like if it
but I would really,
happens, you'd be like, Okay, this. You know what? You could do a heck of a lot worse.
You
Like
could do a heck of
because
a
I
lot
think
worse.
I hadn't thought of that from the like she really does have that kind of commanding,
Hmm.
and I see this in a it takes a certain kind of sense of self to be at that level and at that stage, but I think that, Cynthia Erivo has a bit of a for lack of a better term diva-ness to her. Like there's a very like I've heard that she's a very it's not difficult to work, but like very exacting. She's very particular. She knows what she wants, and and expects that. And I think that attitude that she herself has is so important to Storm as a character that I think was something that you were saying it was really missing in some previous iterations. And so I think in that regard, I think she could do it really well.
Yeah, and no shade to Halle Berry, who played Storm in the,
No,
like, original live action. She was
no.
wonderful. I just think that it's those movies don't get remembered for anything relating to her, which is such a shame. They, especially the later ones, get remembered for, kind of falling off a little bit.
Yeah.
So it would be really nice to see more of her, that character.
I just don't want Ariana Grande as Jean Grey. I think that one's
Like,
the mistake.
come
Right.
That
on.
like I was like, I think that now that one's lazy.
That's
That's a
super
little like,
lazy.
okay, like, well, no, but if we put Cynthia Erivo, then clearly I was like,
Right. Super lazy. And the actor from Stranger Things, that plays the newish girl from the last couple of seasons. She has red hair.
Baby Sink.
Yes. What do you thought? People have been fan casting her. What are our thoughts?
So she hasn't really proven her acting chops to me yet, other than, I mean, in Stranger Things, she was great. And then she was in The Whale, which was like an Oscar movie from a
Oh
couple
yeah.
years ago.
oh
And
yeah.
she kind of plays the same character so far to me, which is kind of like angry teenager. So I
Mm.
don't really see it yet, but I mean, she could surprise me. I just would want to see her in something else to kind of like, for me personally, to be on board fully.
Yeah.
Because Jean Grey is a
Where
pretty nuanced character, so
Hello.
Mm.
And also, she's like Shauna often says like 1A and 1B. They're my 1A and 1B. Like Jean Grey is of not necessarily equal importance,
yeah,
but like the magnitude of I've always loved Jean Grey just as much. Like
yes.
and then to see them come together as sisters for real in X-Men 97 was like such like I want to get that image of them like on the plane together like tattooed over my heart. It's just too good. Too good. Um, Another strange. Well, actually, speaking of Storm, are you a gamer, Christine?
I used to be, and then I kind of fell off once I got more into books again. It's really like it's hard to balance all of these hobbies that I
It
want to
is.
have.
It
Isn't
is.
that the truth?
Yeah.
And we've talked about that before. Like for the longest time, games were the first thing to go on my priority list. Like if I had a more interesting book or I wanted to get caught up on comics, like it was always games that would drop off. But this past year, 2024, we started doing a lot more online gaming within our group of friends. And all of a sudden, books are piling up. I haven't read, any of the new X books like over the past couple of months. However, we have been playing Marvel Rivals, which dropped at the beginning of December, and season one just officially started yesterday, which included Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman as new playable characters. And then they did a bunch of like nerfing and buffing to existing characters, one of whom is Storm and Toadstool, one of whom is Storm, and I'm still dissatisfied. I'm sorry. She has two offensive attacks. She doesn't even have like, L2 and L1 for PlayStation is just ascend and descend. Like, come the fuck on.
Yeah.
She is an Omega level mutant. Give that bitch some power. She should be able to tear that shit up.
Yeah. This
No
is what I
thoughts.
mean. She doesn't get the respect that she deserves in a lot of this
So true.
media.
So true.
Absolutely.
Are you reading any of the X books?
No, not yet. But I always kind of do this thing where I wait for like a ton of them to pile up and then I
Yeah.
just go at them.
Yeah.
So that's where
Mm.
I'm at right now.
Same.
Yeah.
Have you introduced comics to your child yet, Shauna?
So yes and no. He has very like child level comics, like which I
Yeah.
really love that there's a lot of like young reader based comics that aren't necessarily like superhero, but there are like, it's like this like cat adventures book that he really loves reading about these cats. That's really cute. Or there's this book called Narwhal and Jelly about these two characters, and I really appreciate that they're neither of the characters are they never use pronouns for their characters because they're always in dialogue with each other.
Hmm.
And so it's really nice, so it could be like, oh, anyone can reading it can kind of self-insert and see themselves in it and see like, which I really like that kind of accessibility. And it's very as he's starting to read, so we can take turns and like one of us will be one character and the other will be the other, and so we can kind of read it back and forth with each other. So it's been so he definitely has like is appreciating like the panel art style that is comic books, but isn't necessarily like, like I'm sure there's like going to be like a little kid Spider-Man because like he loves Spider-Man. Like our
Yeah.
speaking of which, we just got a new cat. That's like our other big thing. This little sweet kitten, and this kitten is black and white, so he had to be named Venom.
Of
And
course.
so this little Venom, and he is absolutely a Venom, has just been such a sweetheart, jumping, running, snuggling, like could not ask for a better kitten for our family. So it's been really wonderful. But yeah, he loves Spider-Man, and I'm sure that's going to be like I'm really excited for that upcoming show that they're putting out. That's very much a his level. The one that comes out at the end of January.
Oh, yeah, Friendly Neighborhood
Yeah.
Spider-Man on Disney
Yeah,
Plus.
because he's starting to get a little out of Spidey and His Amazing Friends just because it's more based for preschool level. And now that he's in like first grade, it's kind of he's starting to be just on the edge of that and like wants more. Like
Yeah.
there's this show called Sesame Street Mecha Builders where all of these Sesame Street characters have these like giant mechs. So like there's a giant Cookie Monster mech.
Sick.
And the other
Sick.
day, right? Like it's very cool. And he asked us the other day, he's like, "So where did these mechs come from? Who built them?" And I was like, "Okay," and I didn't know how to say, "Sweetheart, that you're asking for the deep lore of Sesame Street Mecha Builders is probably why maybe we're ready to move forward and the media you consume." But that was
Yeah.
my thought of like, okay, you want more and more depth, and you love knowing all of these things, like. Like one of the Christmas books I got him was one of those like do you ever have those like almost encyclopedia-esque books that were like the white books where they would be like all of the X-Men and it would give like a little bio page
Yeah.
for everyone? And so I got him one on the Spider-Verse characters that he really loved. And
Very
so
cute.
which I didn't yeah, so that's been a really fun. But yeah. So definitely going to be he's very nerdy. So I'm
Yeah.
sure comic books will be in the future, and I'm sure I'll have to dig out my collection from wherever it is in my house. And
And he's got a bunch of gay, nerdy aunties and auntie adjacents that are more than happy to lend him again from our personal libraries.
he has a lot of great aunties, uncles, and everywhere between who are more than willing to share their knowledge and and information and collections with him, and I can't wait for that.
Same. Last sort of, pop culture nerdy moment. So Will Smith the other day, who many of us know was originally cast as Neo in The Matrix, um, had posted something on his Instagram that was, styled a la the original Matrix with like the type and font and whatever. I did notice that it was red instead of green, which was what the original, Matrix type was. Um, but it said something about how he was going to be Neo, and then like that was it. It just said like the next chapter, something is coming. I don't even really remember what the post was, but obviously he's alluding to something with him and the Matrix. What are our thoughts?
Well, first, I want to say that when I learned originally that he was supposed to be Neo, I was kind of like, I learned this, I don't know, a couple years ago. So I didn't know the deep lore of the casting for The Matrix originally. But it's funny because looking back, we just rewatched The Matrix during COVID, and I was like, I don't
Yeah,
know. I feel like Will Smith is too charismatic to be Neo. He kind of worked as,
Mm.
right? Like Keanu Reeves kind of worked as this kind of deadpan, very low key dude who then is like ramps up to being the one and all of that. So it's funny that we're back to this conversation with Will Smith now. But I think is the word on the street that it's like a music video or a new album that he's coming out with now.
Oh, I haven't heard that.
Oh, I would
I
like that would be interesting.
I was
Yeah.
deep in the Reddit threads, and the Reddit threads were saying that they think it's his return to music in some way, and that's like the way that he's getting hype for it. And I don't know if that's true, but that's like what I've the most pervasive theory that I've been seeing. So
Well,
we'll
thank you for
Okay.
doing that legwork because I hadn't heard any of it. Like, for as nerdy as I am, I'm just now really starting to utilize Reddit as like a tool. Um, so I never would have come across those things. So I'm fascinated. I would be down with that.
yeah, that's fair. Reddit's very overwhelming, but to get
And
started with.
confusing and weird
Well,
and
but
lots of weird
especially as
shits
like
on there.
the internet's breaking so much more and like everything just works less and like when I want to search for an answer for something, I immediately go to the what does Reddit say about it? Because
Right.
I feel like I'm much more likely to get an actual person posing an actual question answered by actual people, unlike the top 5 Google searches, which are all AI generated
Sponsored
slop.
or
And
sponsored.
so or sponsored. Yeah, same thing. But like no one has any actual care. It's all algorithm based and
Yeah.
often is like irrelevant and it's so irritating to me is like I having grown up on a different internet and now seeing, the way it's truly degraded in quality and quantity. Both quality and quantity. But
I complain
Yeah,
about that.
I really like that theory, although there is a part of me that would be kind of disappointed to find out if it's like just music or just something, not directly tied to the Matrix.
Yeah.
I think because I know how nerds are and I know how fandoms are, like there's a part of me, I love Will Smith. I've always loved Will Smith. Obviously, he's like a pivotal part of growing up, but then also as, the black kid growing up that kind of subverted expectations or whatever, Will Smith was very um he was a different type of black talent that was like rising through Hollywood, and it was really exciting to see someone that more closely aligned with how I saw myself in the world, as like a black person specifically, and so I feel very protective of him, and I like perish the thought for how the toxic fans will just absolutely lose their minds if we dare touch a single hair on Neo's head. Meanwhile, they're all still struggling to see it as like a trans allegory written by two trans women, and they still think it's all about this white man who's, well, he's not white, but this man who's gonna save us all. Like, it's right there. So let's jump into our topic du jour. We'll be talking about, the Lord of the Rings in general, but more specifically, we just rewatched The Two Towers. Shauna and I watched it together. Christine, it sounds like you did not have to rewatch it. Did you rewatch it just for fun?
Yes, but
Okay.
I definitely didn't have to, but I just like to.
Yeah. So, what's your origin story with Lord of the Rings? How did it come to be something that you cared so much about?
It was actually kind of crazy because I didn't read the books as a kid. I had
Mhm.
no really touch point to the Lord of the Rings series as a child. But in, I want to say, the year 2002, which is when Two Towers came out, my dad decided he's a big movie guy, and he decided to rent Fellowship of the Ring from Blockbuster. And literally, yes, I know, Relic, Relic of the
Just
Past.
just
shout out.
saying
Oh,
rent from Blockbuster sent me.
Yep, yep. And we watched it on a little VHS. Anyway, so we watched it and I was 12 and I remember just being so taken in. And maybe that's part of the age that I was, and it's like a very impressionable age. And I hadn't really found anything to get super into at that point yet. It was kind of like you're still finding your personality, like you're still figuring everything out. So after we watched that movie, I remember just turning to my dad and just being like, I need to see the next one because it kind of leaves off on a cliffhanger. And I knew I'd seen like trailers on TV for the second one. And I was like, we need to see it. I need to see it right now. And it was actually out of theaters, most of the theaters, except for there was like a $5 theater an hour away that was still doing like midnight showings of it just like once a week or something. And my dad was like, all right, like this weekend we're going, like we're just going to go see this thing. So we caught one of the last showings of the Two Towers ever. And then after that, I was hooked. Like I was fully in. I read the books. I did all of my dad was printing me IMDb pages of like movie trivia facts, which is maybe why I love movie trivia so much.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, just like general like a curiosity question. So, did your dad or like your family, were they very like, did they inspire some of this nerd stuff? Like you said, your dad was a big movie guy, and it seems like you're a big movie person.
Yeah, my dad is a big movie guy, mostly to be like up to date on pop culture, I feel. And I don't think he anticipated the level of nerdiness that would like nerdy obsession that would come out of this. I think he was
Mhm.
just like, this is a big movie. You should see it just for, to understand the culture around it. And when he saw how into it I was, he did kind of feed that a little. Like I said, he was printing IMDb pages full of movie
Right.
trivia and stuff for me because he saw how much I loved it. And we would go and like buy posters at the mall and stuff for Lord of the Rings. But overall, I think where it went after that was just like my dad was like, I can't compete with you on this level. Like I support you, but you're go do your own thing, kind of thing.
The student surpassed the master. Like,
Right.
all right, nerd. Shauna, what's your origin story with Lord of the Rings?
So I had the childhood reading experience. So
Mm,
back at my grade school, we had what was called this accelerated reader test, where we had to take these like computer tests that was like ask you like comprehension questions, make sure like plot questions, make sure you understood different things, themes, like and it was like little trivia. It was book trivia. It was what it really was in practice. And so me being the very nerdy child I was, really loved it. And so these books, these big Lord of the Rings books, were worth a lot of points. And so I realized I could get like all of my points
competitive.
in by reading
Competitive.
these
Yeah.
giant books. And so I started in the fourth grade reading The Hobbit. And I was then hooked. I loved it. My favorite, middle school teacher was my English teacher, and so very much encouraged me. Like she's actually, because she had passed when I was in high school, and she's actually the reason why my middle name is Maureen was in honor of my English teacher. Yeah, Mrs. Irwin. And so I had this real love of reading, and I would then read one every year. So I was like Fellowship in the fifth grade, and then Two Towers, sixth grade, and then seventh grade was Return of the King. And I tried to read the Silmarillion, but I was like, it's not as good. And so I then ended up skipping it, and I was like, but so I had to find other books to read, I guess. But yeah, so I ended up that was really where my childhood love came in, was starting really early, and then obviously the movies came out and it was huge. And I've always just kind of been really, like I've always kind of found a lot of myself in like a certain kind of like elven, like
Yeah.
we had kind of talked while we were watching how I think there's a certain elegance and almost a like even like all of like the men aren't very like masculine like compared to like the other like humans and dwarves, but and so I always kind of appreciated that like litheness and a certain element there.
There's
Yeah.
so many forehead smooches in Lord of the Rings. It's my favorite
Oh my
part.
gosh, so many.
Between men, between, besties. It's so sweet.
Yeah. I feel like I was much more along the lines of Christine, where it was just like it was not even really in my consciousness, but some of my gamer friends that I've talked about before, that group of guy friends that were sort of like my basement nerd friends, like we played video games together. Like we started seventh, eighth grade, into like ninth and 10th grade, and that was right around when the Lord of the Rings series started coming out, and my friend Jared was like obsessed with it. I don't know if he had read the books or anything, but he was already like very, very into Lord of the Rings. And so it became this like part of our friend group that like, I'm pretty sure I saw Two Towers in theaters and maybe Return of the King, just because my friend wanted to. And then we would have like these 2-day sleepovers in the summer where we would we would marathon the entire 10 hours or whatever of those movies. no, what is it? Yeah, I mean, I guess probably like 10-ish hours. I can only imagine, but um, secretly, I never cared for it that much. Like, I um, first of all, I don't like period pieces. Like, I know it's like not real, but like, I don't like that sort of like Middle English, like whatever that genre. I've never really liked period pieces. That is the realm of fantasy that is where my sort of nerddom deviates. Like, I see it, I get it. It's just not necessarily for me. I think a lot of it is because, like, first of all, there's no girls. Where are all the girls? Why is it only boys? I hate this. My I prefer women-led anything. So like all of my friends were getting into Lord of the Rings, and I was like, "There's this show Charmed. Have you seen the show Charmed? Because it's just three women doing high kicks and rhyming spells. Like that's my shit." Um, so it never really stuck with me, but because of the friends that I had, it was always just like in my consciousness. And so, when we were emailing back and forth, like I'm able to recall that I always really liked the Two Towers. I thought it was the one that I liked the most out of the three, but also probably because it's the one that I watched the most. But Shauna and I watched it together yesterday, most of it, because, it's like a commitment and we're in our 30s and 40s. So, like, 3 hours for a movie, please, so long. And I was, reinvigorated. Like, I was like, okay, this is interesting again, but it wears off. It wears off kind of quickly, at least for me. So I don't see myself picking it back up and like, ooh, now I gotta watch Return. I'm cool. Like, that was fun to rewatch, but um do you
Not
have
gonna
like
get into War of the
specific?
Ring,
No,
like,
no, no.
and like
I'm
you
not
didn't
gonna watch
watch
The
Game of
Hobbit.
Thrones either,
Never.
like.
Not a second of the Game of Thrones. I'm not going to watch the Rings of Power. Like it's really no shade to the genre. I mean, part of it is shade to the genre because like one thing that we realized yesterday watching it is like it doesn't pass the Bechdel test.
Mhm.
There's not a person above the shade of like sickeningly pale. It's just
Yeah.
super white, super male, and that just neither of those resonated with me, but it resonated with people I cared about. So I was like, sure, I'll watch this. Um, Christine, do you have any like key memories or anything that you're like, when I think of Lord of the Rings, I think of blank?
So I feel like obviously I was really into all of the actors and actresses in it. Like I had a huge crush on Orlando Bloom. I wanted to be Liv Tyler. I wanted to, yeah, like Miranda Otto was like, I was like, I want to believe in myself as much as her character does. Um, but I think for me, a big theme in Lord of the Rings that I don't know gets talked about as much with the movies, maybe, but it's the theme of the environmentalism aspect of it, where it's
Mm.
like we're turning so much to industry and stuff and burning down all the trees and things like that, and then everything works together to fight back. It's like tale as old as time kind of
Sure.
story, of course, but I always love that aspect of it and how Lord of the Rings tells that story, but not without making it like a really primary plot point. Like you're so focused on the battles and the
Yeah.
characters and the lore.
Orlando Bloom.
Yes, which I love.
It is
So,
almost
yeah.
like a hopeful religiousness to it, and I think, something else that I was thinking about in terms of, like, a childhood, like, I was raised Catholic, and so J.R.R. Tolkien was famously very Catholic, and he actually helped convert a contemporary of his, C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, to become religious, and I remember, like, being a kid, like, that was, like, for a very long time, my historical if you could be a fly on the wall and hear any conversation, I always wanted to hear like the conversations in English pubs between C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. I always thought that would be such a fascinating like timepiece, and like I always thought like, but I like that kind of there is a hopefulness to it that I feel like is so much of modern religiousness doesn't tends to be so much harsher, so much more austere in a different way, and those kinds of themes of saving the world, maintaining a certain degree of goodness is really kind of lost in a lot of that you
Yeah.
don't find that in those there's a disconnect there.
What about you, Shauna? Do you have any like key memories when someone says like, "Oh, Lord of the Rings"? Like, what jumps to mind?
gosh, just honestly, just bringing me back to that kind of teenageness, because like, I was like a junior in high school when Two Towers came out. Like that was very much like that era. Like I remember like playing the Two Towers Xbox game with my cousin because he had just moved. Yeah, he just moved in with me, and like you could like play as like the three main characters and like do like the Battle of Helm's Deep, and it was like very great graphics for the time. It was very
Yes.
cool, and like like my cousin collected because he was that nerdy white guy who he collected swords, and so like he had like the giant sword of like I think he had Aragorn's sword, and like I had this like really pretty statue, and like of course like thinking back like, oh, of course the statue I had was of the broken Narsil, and in front of it like, and it was so pretty, and like I always liked that, like it all like the little metal pieces were all broken up, and gosh, I wonder where that
When
is. I'm sure I have it.
the
I have so
sword,
many
oh
things.
no.
Yeah.
What is the thing you're talking about though? What is it? You said the
It's
seal.
the shards of Narsil being the sword, like yeah.
It was like the sword that was used to take off Sauron's ring, like the ring from Sauron's hand in like the very first battle of the first movie, and the sword broke, and they like kept it, and it was the oh my gosh, what is his name? Elendil's sword. So yeah, I don't know the lore that well of Lord of the Rings. I'm more of a movie Lord of the Rings fan, but I know that much at least. But then in
Yeah.
yes, the general outlines. And then in the third movie, Elrond uses those shards to make a new sword for Aragorn, which is Anduril, the Flame of the West. And that's like the lore of that sword becoming a different sword and then using it to beat like or fight in that last battle in the third movie.
Nothing. I got nothing. Like, you're like, I don't really know the lore that well, and then
That is
there
something you would do
was
though, like about
no, 100%.
Marvel. Like, oh, I'm not familiar with this character. I just know these five important backstory points, and then those that broad branch off. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And like
Yeah,
thinking about
I
how it's all based on D&D, like so much of like modern D&D is like I play as I'm going to be playing D&D later this afternoon actually. And like so much of it, like when we were our friend Ryan, who also goes by Snacks, is was also with us and like point out like, oh, that ranger ability of Aragorn's, like, but like thinking about how so much of our modern, when we think about the fantasy genre, those foundations were all set in the Lord of the Rings books and movies, and it's so foundational, and it's very much like you don't realize that it's that all so much what you're seeing is not like that, it's that all of that it almost feels trite when you're watching the
mm,
Lord of the Rings because it has been done and copied so many times that you don't even realize the ways in which it's permeated the collective conscience of our culture. And I think that's such a just its everlasting impact in when I think of Lord of the Rings, and like the memory is just everything.
yeah, coincidentally enough, like again, I barely remember, I remember the main characters' names, I remember the general plot. But what I remember the most is, so I was in gifted language arts, and that when you said accelerated reading test, I was like, that sounds so familiar, and perhaps maybe I took that as well. But the gifted programs for what they were, they definitely allowed for kids to explore creativity and create things in a different way that like wasn't necessarily always encouraged in standard immersion class or whatever the right name is. But my friend Jared, who was like the most creative out of all of us, who often used his powers for evil, unfortunately, but we would have, these sleepovers and just be total nerds. Like in one sleepover, I remember we downloaded the Power Rangers episode Forever Red because that's always been my like one of my core nerd identities is loving Power Rangers. But we filmed an entire like trailer for a parody movie called Lord of the Hats that was using characters from books that we had read throughout the years in English class. So, if anyone remembers the book The Giver, the main character Jonas, Jonas was our protagonist. He was Frodo. We made like a felt character of him. The main villain was Fishman, and he was the pilot who was flying the plane that crashes in the book Hatchet. And Brian like goes to try to like swim and see what he can find for like supplies, and he sees this man's face being like eaten by fish or whatever because he's decomposing. Um, I don't, and that, like those are the two main things that I remember. There was this. Oh my god! Instead of going invisible, I just remembered this. Instead of going invisible when he put the hat on, it turned into this dancing panda scene where it was like we had a literal song, like it's the dancing panda scene. It has nothing to do with the plot. Like it was so fucking obscure and creative that like when I think of Lord of the Rings, I actually think of Lord of the
That's actually beautiful. What are the odds that we could get this on the internet at this
Oh
point in
no,
time?
I have no idea because it was filmed on a handy cam, to
Right.
be clear, like
Of
our
course it
friend
was.
John's dad's handy cam. So it's probably on one of those old, you remember when they tried to like start slimming things down, they made the tiny VHSs that went in the bigger VHS tapes. So first we would need all of those things, including a VCR. Um, However, my friend Anthony, who does listen to this and who is familiar with this and still friends with Jared, Anthony, I might make you see if Jared can figure that out because, like, we printed out a bunch of sheets of paper of pictures of orcs and then just like cut them up and flipped them up like Guess Who almost by and we tied string to it and just like set up the camera and pulled the pictures of the orcs so it
Yeah.
looked like they were marching to the Battle of Helm's Deep. Like it was so involved, and I have no idea what we did with it. We showed it in class, and everyone was like obsessed with it, but we did nothing with it.
The level of filmmaking here just feels really high. So
Right, right. And then simultaneously we're also like pirating Forever Red on like Kazaa or LimeWire or whatever peer-to-peer service we were using. And just like it reignited my love for Power Rangers. So, what a nerdy memory. Um, but in general, so is fantasy your bag, Christine? Like, are you into the whole realm?
I am. So I love Lord of the Rings and I love Game of Thrones. Actually, my dog is here with me and her name is Joan Snow. She is sleeping on the bed right now, but she's just
Oh,
a big white dog named Joan Snow. And just so it's like,
Joan Snow?
yes.
Like
I love
Jon
it.
Snow?
Yes, exactly. And it was fully because the rescue that we got her from had named her Snow White. And we were like, she responded to Snow already. So we were like, how can we make this nerdy?
Oh,
Yeah,
And that's how. But a lot of the time I am drawn to like that kind of old timey, like medieval style fantasy. Like I know that you guys just talked about the Dungeons and Dragons movie.
yeah,
And that was kind of that in that style. And I really liked that movie, maybe because of that, and also because of all the other great things about it.
yeah.
But I
really
would
fun.
say, yeah, yes, it was so much fun. I would watch more of those if they made them for sure. Um, but yeah, as far as like fantasy goes, I'm open-minded. I love a lot of other things as well. I'm definitely not only into fantasy, and I definitely don't know fantasy as deeply as other people do. But Lord of the
Sure.
Rings, the movies specifically, are like my forever love.
Yeah. What about you, Shauna? Fantasy in general, what's your vibe?
See, I've always been a big fan. Like, I was very into Game of Thrones. Like, I read all the books. I thought there were going to be more. Maybe, who knows? Time will tell. Whatever George R. R. Martin is doing right now, it's not writing, but
Right.
that's okay.
Yeah, it
But
just
I love them so I they were very like they were very engrossing. Like we used to have like watch parties with some of our friends and we used to go through and like it was very much I love the when media is such a zeitgeist that it's like everybody's in on it. It was not only watching with like my nerdy friends on Sunday night, but then going and talking about it with my coworkers the next day in the office. It was that kind of where it's so across demographics. And I think that's something where fantasy has always kind of been really a arm's length away from that, and I kind of loved seeing that. Like, but no, I really like, the Dragon Age games. I think they're very fun. Like, fantasy's cool. Like, I think I like space sometimes more, like, but also, like, I feel like I get deeper into, like, nerdier fantasy than I do, like, space stuff. Like, if
Sure.
it's, like, really, like, big science fiction, like, I feel like I get a little more bored, actually, than I do with fantasy.
Sure. Yeah, and also a shout out to my friend Anthony, whose dog's name is Hodor. And he's like arguably one of my favorite dogs of all time. He's giant pitty with this huge head and these huge beams. But um, yeah, I kind of already said it, but like fantasy just, it never stuck for me. Like, it was never the thing that would pull my focus. Again, I would watch things kind of to be part of the conversation, but then there just came a certain point in time where I just was like, I have other things to watch that will make me happy. So like, when Game of Thrones started and everyone was like being pushy about it, they're like, oh, you love, sci-fi, you like nerd stuff, you would love this. I'm like, no, I wouldn't. And then it became like a point of contention where too many people were telling me that I should watch it. And I went full Taurus and like dug my heels in, was like, oh, well, I'm never going to watch a second of this program because of the fact that everyone's telling me.
That's fair.
And I think that there's something that we've kind of talked about and around, but I can't help but ignore the fact that fantasy is often, especially historically, very straight, very white, very male focused and oriented in a way that I feel like space and future properties tend to be more expansive. Like, you can be anything and everything. It's a lot easier to kind of retrofit a certain kind of modern, aesthetic and sensibility in all the different ways. Whereas people throw such a shit fit if you put a person of color in a fictional fantasy world.
Yeah.
And like you saw it in Game of Thrones, like in the most recent one where they had the family that, were so gosh darn cool. Like, I love that they had like the Targaryen white, like,
Locks,
hair. Like,
yeah.
I thought it was such a cool, like, but also like, but that just really doesn't exist. And like, when, like, one of the moments when we were watching it, like, Gandalf appears, with his new name change, though really unoriginal, just going from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf. He's like, actually, I don't go by Gandalf the Grey anymore. My name's different. It's Gandalf the White. And we're like,
Right.
okay, honey, you could just do a little, like, change a little something up.
Right.
But,
Gondolf
you
or
know,
something.
right, and then is literally blinds the party, blinded by the white, and then shows his white horse Shadowfax. And, and now in the other scene, well, here we are, the Black Gate of Mordor, the land of
Right.
evil.
Yes.
And,
Right.
that historical use of black versus white, that
Yeah.
black is evil, white is good. And I think that is so subconsciously informed a lot of nerd culture, and why I think there's so much, prejudice that is, even if it's not, and it often is, on these, like, very, surface level, there's still that kind of subconscious passive level to it, that it feels like you're a usurper if you are anything other than what they're used to. And I think that's something that, is worth discussing, that I can see where, it might have had a subconscious effect on you and your enjoyment and love of the genre.
Absolutely. And this is why I don't like saying I'm a fantasy diehard person, because there's so many implications with that, with the fact that there are no women usually, and like historically rather, and people of color, that's like a huge thing. Like when Rings of Power came out and there was a black elf and everybody lost their minds. And it's the same thing as like Game of Thrones when they were the Valarians, the black family that were Targaryen blood and all of that. So I just feel like there's a lot of deep problematic things that can be pervasive in fantasy as well.
Which is kind of what part of the purpose of like this podcast is to remind people that like we have a right to these properties. We have a right to enjoy these things and take up the space. Like, we try to be really intentional with, who we bring on and how we talk about these things, because left to their own devices, nerd culture will stay as is. Like, you know, you mentioned like space is a little more expansive, but like people threw the exact same fucking hissy fit when John Boyega appeared on screen in Star Wars. Like, it was the same sentiment. So, you know, I guess maybe before we jump into some of the key points of the movie, how do we navigate this as fans? Or maybe since Shauna and I have you know talked about this on previous episodes, Christine, how do you navigate it? How do you still find joy when people are seemingly so committed to taking it from you?
Yeah, I think what you said about reclaiming it and kind of saying that I deserve to be a fan of this and I deserve to also see myself represented, see other people that I love represented in these spaces. And that's not that doesn't mean it's like woke or whatever the terminology that people use to describe these things is. That's called progress and that's called bringing fantasy into the modern age. So I think that yeah, that's pretty much my take on it. So when they make these moves of like, even if it does seem kind of like
Forced.
yes, like if they're making these moves, I'm like, you know what, I support it. That's great, and we'll keep
Totally.
supporting it, and we'll keep watching it when they make progress, like decisions to make progress like this, and I'll just keep having online battles with people who are making fun of it or pretending like it's not real and it's not canon or something.
Yeah.
Well, you see,
Yeah.
the
And I use,
biological makeup of elves is very important because they're
right.
very real and have a biology to them,
Exactly.
despite being fictional
My,
characters.
and you know, I say forced, like, and perhaps that's like maybe a bit of like internalized, you know, anti whatever, but there are sometimes when it's definitely like, where did these black people come from? Like, all these people are white right now, but there were all those black people back. That like I think that's how the Game of Thrones thing is, right? Like the black family is they are not, what's the opposite of descendants? They came before the modern day Targaryens, right? They're their ancestors.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there was like the like they came from like the other continent basically, and
Got
so
it.
that was where the Targaryens also came from. Was
Got it.
then they came over
Bloodline.
and conquered Westeros.
Oh, so there was some colonization happening even in
Oh
fantasy
yeah,
too.
for
Absolutely.
sure. Yeah, colonization
Oh,
is a
most
huge
definitely.
aspect. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's jump into just you know kind of a talking through maybe the key points of the Two Towers.
Actually, can I say one
Um,
more thing just
please.
about
It's
representation? And like, as much as I love the original Lord of the Rings trilogy that came out in the early 2000s, I think that the success that it gained also paved the way for kind of like that new era of fantasy still being kind of gatekept by white straight men, and I think those decisions were made very intentionally by like Peter Jackson and that whole team, who I love because they're so creative and they did such a good job, but they made it a point to only cast indigenous or black people as the Urukai or the orcs or
Yes.
people. Yeah, that's the only time you see people of color is when they're like the bad guys. And the elves could only be like blonde or like it just set the tone, I think. And they're trying to undo it now, I think, but I back then there was an opportunity to do more, and I don't think they did that.
it was very unexamined back then because I you could absolutely argue those were not intentional decisions,
I'll
but
say it was unexamined by us because I think there have always been cultural critics who have seen it and been like, "Yo, what the fuck are you doing?"
well, I'm saying unexamined by the creators. Like I
Oh,
bet
sure, sure,
Peter
sure.
Jackson didn't this never these conversations were nowhere on their radar. I would literally like to think because
Yeah.
20 years ago it was a different time and these questions weren't being if they were being asked, but they were not being asked with a voice and a microphone to get them heard in the same ways that they are today.
Right.
And I think that is part of where that change came because the internet and the way that it's really grown has let Twitter's popularity where you could actually talk to the creators and voice your perspective and opinion is so much more prevalent now than it was back then, and I think that's such a important part. So even giving him the benefit of the doubt, that still doesn't excuse the fact that it still happened, and I think
Right.
that's an important part too. But you're right, the very much the it really just reinforced itself, and then a certain kind of straight white boy thought, oh, this is for me. What do you mean it's for you? How dare
Mhm.
you? And I
Right.
think that's, how dare you try to take this from me? As though, having, a black elf in 2024 changes the fact that if you want only white elves, this trilogy still exists for you. You can
Mhm.
just go pop in your DVD, stream it on the internet, and still watch this. It doesn't change your memory. And I think that's something I always think about when people get upset at other changes to like modern, like, like I was a big Ninja Turtle fan, and like people like got really upset that they changed April O'Neil. Like, and I was
Right.
like, which is so ridiculous because,
Or when they
again,
introduced Venus de Milo.
right? And I was like, if you just want, like, do I have a preference for classic yellow jumpsuit April? Sure, she was mine. But the fact that that is not the April that my child grew up with does not bother me. Why would that irk me at all? Like, he now enjoys his April, who is much cooler and gets to do things and goes on adventures with a slime girl. And it's much more fun and, like, has more to do. He absolutely has a better April O'Neil, and I love that for him. Like, he thinks it's weird when he sees Doc Ock from Spider-Man be a boy with a
Yeah.
weird bowl cut because his Doc
Yeah.
Ock is a girl with a side shave, and I'm like, cool, love that.
Well, I'm also kind of reminded how, like, and not even to be like, but actually, but like I think about, you know, Tim Burton, who has like explicitly said he just doesn't think, black or brown people fit into the aesthetic of his film world. And honestly, there are so many parts of me where I'm like, I'd rather you just say that. I'd rather you just be like, fine, then I don't need to watch Tim Burton movies. I don't need to buy into Tim Burton's, universe. But as the rest of culture continues to evolve and realizes that the fans, and first of all, that the aesthetic is made up and that there is a huge array of people who very much so will fit that aesthetic, you're just fucking lazy and want to cast a, rapist like Johnny Depp and, keep him up and not anyone else, which, whole other conversation.
It's the definition of prejudice. He literally prejudged
Yeah.
every single person who is like as being
Yeah.
not fitting, and like it's such an inherently limited worldview, and and I think it's so much worse off for it. And the
Yeah.
fact of the matter is that being able to find yourself even when you don't see yourself represented is so much harder, but also makes it, there is a kind of passion that comes with that, I think, too, because like you said, you had to fight for your fandom in many ways. And I think that is wonderful and and terrible, but also like there is, but that's why focusing on the only, we've talked about this with problematic media and with problematic,
Mhm.
franchises, figureheads, actors, etc. I think the only wrong answer is to not think about it at all and to go into it with your head in the sand, because we all consume things that are, you know,
Nothing
less
is
that
ethical
are
under the
made
sun.
right. Exactly. Everything is questionable, but that isn't a reason to ignore it either.
So, picking back up, instead of talking about the plot, let's just talk about, because it's a 3 hour movie and there's a lot of plot. Let's just talk about, some key moments that really stuck out to us. The first of which being that Sean and I like couldn't stop making like dead name jokes about Gandalf the Grey and Gandalf the White. Like, like put some respect on his name. He has told you he
Yeah.
wants to be Gandalf the White.
Like Grima Wormtongue immediately, like if you weren't sure that with a name like Grima Wormtongue he was evil, immediately dead names Gandalf to Theoden, and I think that like he's really showing to his audience. That was clearly what the directors were intending, I think.
Yes. And also
Clearly.
Grima Wormtongue immediately just being super creepy with women, like when the way he is around Eowyn, just like really like the lingering stares, and she's obviously uncomfortable. So bad guy all around, you can tell.
Bad guy
Yeah.
all around. And also, he looked so sickly. Like, obviously, again, these are like kind of things we know as adults that are used to sort of like evoke imagery. Like, a name like Wormtongue is intentional to convey like what type of person this is. But it's also just like so gross. Like, you look gross, bro. Like, everyone's so mad about there being black people in like fantasy. Like, be mad that people aren't bathing. Be mad that his hair is greasy. There's much more important things to worry about.
Yes.
Period.
That man hasn't seen the sun in years. No idea.
Right.
Well, that's
Right.
all there is to do. Like, what else are you doing? Just walk
Like,
outside. It's cool.
go outside. Who are your favorite characters in the Fellowship? Well, who's your favorite Fellowship characters, and then who's your favorite non-Fellowship characters?
I mean, my favorite Fellowship character, it's really tough because I like them all. But as a kid, when I first watched it, Legolas was like my end all, like my dream. I
Yes.
loved him. I was a 13-year-old girl, just fully just entranced by everything about him.
Yeah.
As an adult rewatching, Aragorn, incredible. He's sensitive. He talks about his insecurities. He's doesn't want power, which is always, a green flag. He wants to like
Yeah.
run away from responsibility because he thinks it'll corrupt him, and he's like he's self-aware, and also like obviously has the traits of being a great fighter, protects all of his loved ones and his friends. Also, Carl Urban, Éomer, really hot. It didn't like really hit me until I was like an older teenager, and then I was like, oh wow, I like never saw, like I was so busy looking at Legolas that I didn't see this other beautiful man.
I felt about Giles and Buffy. I get it.
Oh,
Yeah.
please.
It's you late.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, Carl Urban plays Mother's Milk in not Mother's Milk.
uh,
What's his
um,
name?
what is his name? I can't think of his name right now.
Judge Dredd?
No,
No,
in The Boys,
in The
he
Boys.
Oh,
like
oh
is
yes, he's Butcher.
yes,
The
Butcher.
Butcher. Yeah, yeah, Butcher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's great in that too. And then my last one I have to say is Sam, because Samwise he's like the reason that the whole story was able to come together. He saves Frodo so many times because Frodo has that thing where he's like so innocent and like corruptible and all that. And Sam is like his protector, the person who gets him out of trouble a million
Yeah.
times throughout the trilogy.
Yeah.
And
So then
definitely
is
the like post like homoerotic, like there's definitely like the
Oh
subtext
yeah.
there of like Mr. Frodo of the like as they
so he's
have
the
this,
sub.
very right, like
Yes.
this house he is like I'm the gardener, but like that like caretaker of his garden.
The
Yeah,
gardener.
Which is beautiful. We love seeing that.
Yeah, love that.
absolutely.
So then is Carl Urban's character, I already forgot, Eomer?
Yes.
Is that your favorite non-fellowship character? Or just the hottest?
Just the
Because we
hottest.
will come back to that. We
Yeah,
will come
just
back
the
to that.
hottest. We don't learn enough about him in the movies to like really get into
Mm.
his person, his character. But
That's one of the things that I actually said to Shana when we were watching it. I was like, there's too many people in here. I can't keep track of all of these. There's too many people. And she kind of made the point that like that's what people say about the MCU, except the difference is the MCU is over 20 years, and like I'm expect to know all of these people whose names all sound the same, they all look alike, and they're all in one 3-hour movie.
yeah,
Like, too much.
yeah,
I'm overwhelmed. I can't. It's too many people.
that's totally fair. And like the MCU has the breakouts where everybody has their own franchise or everybody has their
Yeah,
own backstory that you can look into if you're interested or you don't know people.
exactly. What about you, Shauna? Who's your favorite fellowship, non-fellowship?
It was also Legolas. I both like a historical, like I was like obviously just an attractive like character, very skilled. I liked, and I find I really always find the endearing relationship between him and Gimli, where they have this like this one-upmanship that is clearly based both in their own internal competitiveness and in their like, but like their belief in themselves, but also their belief in their friend, and like
Hmm.
I always think of our friend Snacks when I think of that, because he is always someone who's always very good at things also. And so whenever we are playing either against or with each other, I feel like they're like when we're playing the aforementioned Marvel Rivals, he always comments whenever I win MVP because there was this period especially where I was winning MVP a lot when we won. And so he would always like, "Oh, I guess you got it again." And I was like, "I know you like."
He
But
hates it.
I
He
feel the
hates it.
same way
No,
when
he
we
doesn't
play
hate it. He
board.
doesn't hate it.
No, he does. No, but I feel the same way when we play board games together because he almost always comes out on top in those, and
Yeah,
I always like think I do well in board games, but usually finish second to him frequently. So
sure.
I have a very similar like, but like it's based on respect, but also that element of like, I do want to win, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that kind of relationship, and I think it's really fun.
So who's your favorite non-fellowship person?
Ooh, I think the Witch King of Angmar. No, I don't know the yeah, it's like the deep cut. No, I always appreciated the Ents. Fun fact, based on the Catholic Church,
Hmm,
because they were a very powerful. It was supposed to be an allegory because they were a powerful force that is very slow to change or move or to adapt to the times. And so that was where they were based on that. So I always thought that was kind of neat. And but I always think that's cool. Like, gosh, probably, yeah. I definitely think I always want the Wizards Council to get kind of more because, like, with like the Ishtari and all of that, like, I think that was such a cool. Yeah, I think I like Eowyn was always like it's hard not to,
yeah,
live live Tyler. Ugh,
sure.
I it's hard.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, I like
I
it's but again, like the fact that like the two women are like, no, I do like these but that's kind of where it was easy to find the fandom through those characters
sure.
in many ways. And that because there often isn't a lot of like diversity in that regard. It's like, well, do you Galadriel's just kind of there and Liv Tyler at least gets to do something. Same with Eowyn and like that's the list.
Yeah. I think my favorite fellowship character, again, growing up was probably Orlando Bloom, because he was cute. And I do love an archer. I've always liked kind of that skill set. And even in games, like I love a projectile fighter. So I did always like Legolas. Watching it yesterday and also this morning, because I had to finish it this morning. I the relationship between Sam and Frodo is definitely endearing. They're arguably from a uh general watching perspective, like their part is kind of just like, oh, look at all this walking that they're doing. Like it's not these huge battles and like, they're but like you were saying, the nature of their relationship and how definitely gay they are, probably I was like, that's really sweet. It's like it's easy to find the perhaps the relatable humanity in them, because they're both, Frodo's whole thing is this, fight against corruption and also his sort of like willingness at times to give into it versus, Sam, who is sort of, the moral alignment. Although my favorite non-fellowship character and for the rest of time, I think I'm gonna have like emotional feelings is about Smeagol and Gollum. Um, Watching Frodo betray him and like sell him out, I
Yeah.
was literally like, I don't remember any of this. How could you do that to him? He didn't murder you in your sleep. You tricksy fucking hobbitses.
I
Like
know.
he broke my goddamn heart. Um, I don't really remember what happens next. That's the only maybe I need to find like a supercut of just what happens with Gollum because I'm invested in him. Um, I don't think it's good based on the faces you both just made.
Not great. No, it's I can tell you right now, he makes
Please.
like Gollum gets captured and while he's like holding a little fish in his mouth, he's so
I remember
trusting
that.
of
Yeah.
Frodo. It's so heartbreaking. It's like a pet, like that you're like it's just so sad.
Yes.
And then yeah, the men of Gondor take him and beat him up basically, for
Yeah.
Ooh.
information about the ring. Yeah, it's really
Well,
bad.
so
And
I
then
remember that.
yeah,
And then Two Towers ends with him, clearly like he's breaking again.
yeah,
The Gollum personality is emerging, and they're kind of like fighting back and forth about whether or not they're going to hurt him, and Smeagol is slowly giving in, and then they say like we could let her do it, we could let her kill them. Who are they talking about? I don't remember.
Oh yeah, we forgot a huge female character in the movies. Shelob, the giant spider. That's who they're talking about. The giant spider that lives in the caves above Mordor.
I do remember that. I do remember that. Female representation is so important.
Beautiful, so much
I'm so
diversity.
glad. Yeah, such diversity, such diversity. Um, yeah, something that I actually took note of was like I have oh I'm a big animal lover. Like I don't think that's like a wildly, interesting thing to say about yourself, but like I am the person that's like, don't fucking shoot those horses. Like I watched John Wick for the first time and got like 3 minutes in and had to go to doesthedogdie.com only to find out that like the entire fucking premise of the movie is based on this guy's dog getting killed, which made it more relatable. Because when I tell you, if I ever find my dog's like right here, if I ever find the motherfucker that made him so skittish and like, whoever hurt him, I'll go John Wick. I'll swords, guns, my bare hands, I'm taking that motherfucker out.
Toadstool
Um,
Fiona deserves everything.
Toadstool Fiona, yeah. His full name is Toadstool. My former partner's name is Mario. So our first dog was Bowser, and then we got Toad together, and then we split. I'm always proud of his namesake, and his middle name is Fiona because he literally looks like the hippo Fiona from the Cincinnati Zoo. And perhaps if he decides to stand up, he's laying at my feet. But which is actually kind of related to what one of the things that I took note of. When they harm animals in even if they are not real or real looking, like an oliphant, like it's clearly supposed to be an elephant, but I'm like, don't hurt them. They didn't do anything. They don't know that they're at war with you guys. Like the bad guys are right up there. Shoot higher. Stop shooting at the elephants. And then that also sort of like relates to, Gollum and how he's clearly like in the care of Frodo and he calls him master and like I know that someone hurt my dog, and so like this watching him betray Smeagol, I was like really getting choked up because I was like, he trusted you, and that's very much so how I feel about my relationship with my dog, which is like I know that he trusts me, and anytime I feel like I've even remotely sort of like done something to scare him or like startle him or whatever, I'm like, no, 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 keep trusting me. Like, I promise, I got your back. I love you so much. The best. Yeah. And it also reminded me of Buffy because there's the are you a Buffy person, Christine?
No, I actually kind of missed out on that. I came up a little later after it, and I need to go back and kind of rewatch because I want to know and I want to be a Buffy fan.
It's never too late.
There's like
If you want to jump
four
on.
episodes from season one, and then just skip right to season two. Is what I will
Perfect.
always
No,
say.
okay. Hot take. I am rewatching the entire series for the first time. So Buffy is my number one fandom. Like it's Buffy and X-Men, but Buffy is what actually kind of anyways, doesn't matter. But I'm rewatching the whole series for the first time in I don't even know how long. Like I've always just watched like comfort episodes and bits and pieces or whatever. So I'm rewatching the whole series. Season one, when you're an adult and can like look at it and be like, oh, this is so campy and silly and stupid, it's like way easier to watch. If you don't take it
Mm.
seriously and you're just like, there's a whole episode where Willow meets an online predator because it was like the mid 90s, so like online predators were very relevant. I mean, they still are, but that is literally like a demon trapped in a computer, and like he catfishes her, and like then he's this giant computer demon, and it's just so bad and so tacky. And the way that they talk about the internet, you're like, what the fuck is this?
Well, and then
So
like the teacher being a techno pagan.
a techno pagan, correct? Like it's just
Yeah.
you're in for a ride. So I really hope you do choose to watch it. But
Especially because
um,
it's so I think it's very fantasy adjacent because it has so much like, and I love that kind of where fantasy creatures are put in a modern setting. And I think there's I love like Hellboy. I feel is like very much like that, where it has that kind of mythological modern mythology and modernity meet. And I think Buffy
yeah,
is a really wonderful, like so much of it really does hold up. I think you would really dig it, honestly.
check it out. The other thing, oh, Turrican. So Urukai is the name of the like orc monsters, and in season 7 we're introduced to Turrican, which is like grotesque uber vampire. And the creator of Buffy was definitely a huge nerd, and I just put together for the first time like, oh, I think that was probably they were probably inspired by he was probably inspired by Lord of the Rings too.
That makes sense.
Okay, other key parts that we took notes on. Anytime I see a team gearing up, it is basically like the straight male version of a girls getting ready montage. And they were like putting on their swords, and I was like, ooh,
Like buckling their shields on. You're just like, yeah, I
yes,
love that for them.
girl.
Yes.
All of a sudden Legolas is like, can I borrow your foundation? Like they're definitely really primping to go to battle.
Yes.
So like now all this time later, is there anything that has stuck out? Like you definitely talk about the environmentalism of it all. Are there things that have stuck out for you like all these years later where you're still like that was so powerful to see it or to watch it or experience it?
I think when I rewatched it this most recent time, what really hit me was the Theoden's story arc, which is basically where he's under a spell for
Mhm.
decades. And when he wakes up, he realizes that his son has died, and that he never really got to say goodbye or have that kind of bond as an adult with his son. And I thought it kind of hit me watching it that this is kind of maybe like an allegory for, I don't know, like depression or something where you just like can't connect with people. And then when you finally can and you break out of it, it's too late. And then he has that like heartbreaking line that always gets me where he says, no parent should have to bury their child. And it just like hits in a
Mm,
very human way that doesn't have anything to do with the fantasy of it all. It's just like a father and his son. And as like I'm not a parent, but I just can like just empathize with that emotion in that scene. I think like that character becomes a lot more tragic at watching as an adult and with that context.
Yeah, it's interesting because you as you were saying that it also sort of I think for um, those of us who are in like frayed relationships with our parents or family members where we've chosen to distance ourselves because of the actions or beliefs or whatever of the people that care for us, and I'm kind of in this point with my dad like over the past few years we've come much closer and like I'm really grateful for the relationship that we have. And we had this conversation a couple weeks ago where I finally was able to start sharing some things that I was like, yes, Dad, how you participate in politics does impact our relationship. And like, literally, I'm like making this connection of like this spell, kind of being drawn off of him where he was really hearing me for the first time. And like, how that was able to create just like the next level of our relationship. And it is sort of like allegorical. Like I'm so grateful that I lost my mom in January of 22, and we never fixed our relationship really. Like to be able to repair that relationship and realize that he is probably just as grateful as I am to be working towards something, and then seeing that from that lens of the king who like I didn't get to say goodbye, I didn't get to repair or whatever. That stuck out for me in a different way, literally just now than even when I was watching it. Thanks for sharing that. That's beautiful. What about you, Shauna?
I mean,
Anything that stuck out
I
all these years later?
honestly, I think that the biggest thing that stuck out for me, like the relationship of like seeing Gollum and really fighting his internal demon that is like himself, and like really like the desire to do better, the but yet falling into bad habits, and that like but yet still getting betrayed, and it's still not being, even though he's changed so much, still feeling like it wasn't good enough. And I feel like that story really hit me in a very like symbolic, allegorical way that I don't know that I really like saw it in that same way in when I was first watching it. And definitely now, years later, I see that kind of fight in a different with through a different lens.
Yeah, I took note of the scene where he's captured, or no, it's actually before he's captured, before Frodo betrays him, when Smeagol sort of wins. Like the two personalities are arguing, and Smeagol is successful, and Gollum leaves, but he doesn't come back again until he is betrayed by Frodo, and Gollum's like, "Told you, bitch! Like he's gonna betray you." That scene of them having conflict, and then Gollum essentially leaving, and Smeagol taking control. Like I don't remember it being that deep when I watched it when I was a teenager, and I was watching it again, sort of like some from that perspective, Shauna, of just like, man, he's literally fighting his demons, like his internal demons, to try to do the right thing, and it was really beautiful to see again. But for me, the Battle of Helm's Deep, I don't like I barely remember anything about watching the movies. Like I said, like it was kind of like seeing it again for the first time. But the first time they mentioned Helm's Deep in this movie, when they were evacuating the townspeople, and they're like, hurry up and get to Helm's Deep, it like brought this flood of memories back of like how many times we watched the Battle of Helm's Deep like over and over again, and like filming the Lord of the Hats, and like Helm's Deep being sort of part of our cinematography, with like pulling the orc printouts, and watching my friend Jared play Two Towers on PlayStation 2 and the Battle of Helm's Deep. I was just like, oh my god, you can do this in video games, it's so cool. Like it really was sort of this like I don't know, like moment of a cinematic moment that has stuck with me all these years later. That as soon as I heard that again, I was like, I forgot how cool this was. The Battle of Helm's Deep is really, really cool. It should that's all that Two Towers should be. It's just the battle.
And I will say that's the best battle, I think, in the whole trilogy, in my opinion,
Yeah.
because there's so much, they set the stakes so well, and they set the expectation of how outnumbered they are. Like, it's just very specific. And then the way it's filmed, it's like gritty. There's rain.
Yeah.
Everybody's just like covered in blood and mud and everything. And it's just, it feels so visceral compared to the other battles in the movie, especially like in the next movie. It's just like huge epic battles, but just like, I don't know. And obviously the stakes are still high, but it doesn't feel as like you're in the, in it with them as the Battle of Helm's Deep does.
Well, the way that they portrayed it too, where Gandalf was like, yeah, so it worked before, but that doesn't mean it's going to work now. This is a really bad idea. And like, holding ourselves up here is a mistake, as we're just going to like, and I thought that was a really interesting perspective too, that like, by all accounts, it should have just been, like Aragorn, like having this conversation in Elven, so with Legolas, and then, screaming the punchline in English, like was I thought an interesting too, like before, the elves showing up fashionably late as always.
Of course.
Like the femmes they are.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing before we maybe close out is there's the lines that kind of close out the movie, the dialogue between Samwise and Frodo. Samwise has this quote: "It's like the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were, and sometimes you didn't want to know the end, because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad has happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come, and when the sun shines, it'll shine out clearer. I know now folks in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going because they were holding on to something. That there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for."
I quote that pretty regularly, not like in person, but like it's like a quote that I have shared a lot of times, and I always get like a little emotional during that part, because it's also the montage where they're like winning the battle and like good triumphing over evil, and it's like wrapping up the whole movie, and I think they just did it so well, and that speech really speaks to a lot. I feel like it can apply to a lot of things, and still be relevant to a lot today too.
I mean, I fully was like, I heard him say the first part, and I was admittedly like multitasking, and I was like on my phone and taking notes and blah blah blah, and I like had to pause it and go back and listen, because it's also like um uh after Samwise has sort of like brought Frodo back from the brink of like almost giving in, like there's a super gay moment where he says, "It's your Sam." Like, okay, girls, we
Yeah.
get it. You love each
It's like
other.
holding his face,
Um,
like, "It's me, it's your Sam." I'm like, "That's beautiful."
right, like kiss. But
True
and
love's kiss. True
Yeah.
love's kiss. Like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
like
So I like rewound it and then just remembered that I could go and like Google the quote, but it stuck out. I was like, that is literally, that's what you take from stories like this specifically. Obviously, it's very like tongue in cheek that, all these times the fellowship doesn't give up, and specifically Frodo, like there's a lot there, but then also right now, like hearing that when things feel so fucking dark and we are on, the precipice of what we know will be, another seemingly dark time. Um, as much as I want to say, like, fuck it, I'm gonna hold up with my friends and only focus on the happy, like, that's just not how we will survive. Like, joy is resistance, happiness is resistance, existence is resistance, but like, we also have to, be ready to go to the Battle of Helm's Deep and like kick ladders down and shit because we have to protect ourselves. And, as three people who are not represented in that movie or that franchise in any real way, to also be like, yeah, I guess we're still going to fucking show up despite how much you don't want us there. We're still going to show up and we're still going to fucking win this battle. And I really didn't mean for it to get so inspirational here at the end, but it is, I guess one of the beautiful parts of Lord of the Rings is like, there's the score. That is the one thing that I forgot to mention. The Lord of the Rings score is what got me into movie scores. Like the dun dun dun, like
Yeah.
on CDs. I would burn it on CDs. Like I learned to drive to the Lord of the Rings score. Like it was so good.
I
Thanks to the composer.
Yeah, Howard Shore was the composer and he was so good. I have a little anecdote. We went to New Zealand for the first time last year, my husband and I, and I was driving us all over the place. We just like literally just drove around both of the islands. And the entire time I was driving, I insisted on only playing the Lord of the Rings soundtrack and narrating the movie basically to him. And I think like he loves it and he loves me, but at some point he was like, there was a certain moment, probably like a week in, where he was like, I just need to listen to something else for a second. I love you so much, but I can't do this right now.
You
I was
don't
like,
want to listen to Gollum's song?
I
Like you don't want to listen
couldn't
over
believe
and over?
it,
Yeah.
right?
but this is where
Like, come on.
Right.
That's so
Yeah.
funny.
Yep.
Is he is your husband a nerd too?
Yes, very much so. Yes.
Got it.
It's one
Yeah.
of the things we bonded over early on in our relationship
Love it.
and continue to.
Yeah. So the way that we typically, end out the show, we talk about just anything that's coming up that we're excited about related to the topic. Are there any new like fantasy media things that are exciting?
So I am a little bit behind. Like I have watched the first season of Rings of Power. I haven't watched the second season.
same.
Yes, I didn't hate the first season. I liked the last I don't know. I liked 2 episodes out of the 8, I'll say. So I wasn't like super intrigued necessarily for the second season, but we'll see. I'm still going to catch up. And that movie just came out, War of the Rohirrim. It was like an
Oh
anime
yeah.
style Lord of the Rings movie. I haven't watched it mostly because I don't know. I didn't see I'm not a big anime fan. Not that I don't like it, but I just like am not into it. So I was just kind of like, this doesn't feel
Same.
like Lord of the Rings to me. But I'm hoping to. So all of my things are just catching up on existing things that have already happened. Unfortunately, I haven't really. Yeah.
So catch up question: have you ever watched the X-Men anime?
No, I haven't. What's the X-Men anime?
Oh, it's on. I think it is. It might still be on Netflix. That's how I watched it.
Yeah.
It is. An X-Men cartoon series that I think was created in Japan, and it's like anime styling. A lot of it has to do with the Dark Phoenix saga. I don't remember the plot, but like there is Jean is like kind of a central figure as the Dark Phoenix, and I think it's like one of those jumps around in time plots. Again, I only ever watched it, once and however many years ago. So if it's still on Netflix, it I felt similarly where I was like, this isn't X-Men. This is anime with X-Men characters.
Yeah.
The only bonus is you get Armor, the character Armor from the comics. Is that her name? Armor?
That
Her
sounds
mutant
right.
ability is that she makes that big pink
Armor.
body shield. Is it? Okay, yeah.
Sounds right.
Um,
But yeah.
yeah, Armor
This is why we need Ryan to be our like.
producer, yeah. Yes, she is a Japanese mutant enrolled. What's her name? Hisako
Okay.
is her name. Okay, so anything you want to plug? Anything interesting that we have coming up? Anything to share?
No, I just I'm on social media as Orda Nerdy, so I thought that was funny for the title of
Love
this.
it.
But no, I just my whole life is just dodgeball and catching up on all of the nerdy media that's out. So I'll continue
Wow.
doing that.
How relatable. Shauna, you're no longer on this show anymore. Christine's taking your place. Thanks so much. My new dodgeball nerd bestie
Perfect.
Right?
has
Like, hey,
arrived.
there's always room for more dodgeball nerds. That's
Yes,
the way I think of it.
Yes.
that's so right.
Yes. So the most important question of real hot nerd shit, because as three super hot people, we are a reminder that nerds are not all, sweaty boys in basements. And we're hot. So who is the hottest character in Lord of the Rings? And then if you have one, is there another particularly hot character in fantasy media?
Yep. I'm gonna have to stick with Aragorn for my Lord of the
Mhm.
Rings hot character because of all the things I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's great. We love us like a man who's in touch with his emotions and also can acknowledge his flaws and is has other male friends as like so much. There's so much to him. I love him. Um, and um, across fantasy. Oh, I would really have to dig deep on this one, and
Yeah.
I would still probably go back to Lord of the Rings, honestly. I don't know that there's, another franchise that I'm, like, as well versed in, so, yeah, Aragorn's my answer just all around, I think, and also
It's
him
a good
specifically him with Arwen, I think they're just, like, they make me so happy, that couple, and, yeah, they're great.
Yeah. Shauna, who's yours?
I'm gonna stick with Legolas. I think Legolas is the hottest one. I think I'm gonna go with like the teenage crush, like just
Yeah.
the hot
Teenage
elf.
Shauna is glad to be able to
Yeah,
say it out loud.
Yeah.
yeah.
And never
And with
forget
that,
too, Legolas and Gimli chose to go into the Undying Lands together. They like didn't get married or do other things. They literally just were together for the rest of their lives and then sailed off into the sunset together. And I think that's
I'm
beautiful.
sure very heteronormatively,
Yeah.
just
Very,
as
yeah,
pure
yeah.
friends
They were
as
roommates.
they
Especially
do.
after
They
in
were forever roommates.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is
yeah.
the
In the movie they were talking about how there's no there like people think there's no female dwarves and like how even the women are like, bearded and people mistake them for men and it's like just say it, Gimli. Like you love the femininity of Legolas and you want to be with him.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with Liv Tyler. I think Liv Tyler is the hottest one.
mm,
That's Arwen, right?
yeah, that's our one.
Yeah, she's the hottest to me, and she's definitely quick sidebar. Sean and I were talking about how sapphic Liv Tyler is. Like, she's got to at least be bisexual.
Yeah.
I need her to be a little queer because
Well,
she's
she
just
plays a
too pretty.
lesbian in the show Harlots. I don't
Right,
know if
right,
you've
right,
ever
right.
seen it, and it's okay. So it's a show about a brothel in England, and like it's very good. It was on Hulu for a very long time, and it's like about like these rival brothel owners, and it's like a show about women in this time period. It's very fascinating and very funny. And Liv Tyler shows up as like this like noble who's secretly gay and like has like it's really good. Yeah.
Kind of like how Famke Janssen shows up in How to Get Away with Murder as Annalise Keating's like
Mm,
surprise. Annalise Keating used to fuck women,
Yeah.
and this is her ex girlfriend, and you're like, yeah, Famke Janssen has hardcore
Yep.
like Dom Sapphic vibes. Like she's turning it
I see it.
out.
And I'm
Yeah,
into it. We're into it. Also,
We're
Shana,
into
did
it.
I cut you off when you were giving like a larger fantasy crush? I couldn't. Sorry if I
Oh
did.
yeah, sorry.
Oh no, guys, you're fine. My larger fantasy crush, I would say the character Iron Bull, voiced by Mr. Buffy himself, Freddie Prinze Jr. He's in Dragon Age Inquisition, and he's this giant. They're called the Kunari, and they're like large and have like these big horns, and he has a goatee, eye patch, and he just has a great personality and is very like his like player romance is really it's wonderful. Definitely check out Iron Bull, Dragon Age
Yeah.
Inquisition. That's my guess. My vote.
Yeah. I think my larger fantasy crush would be who's the tiefling that I said I really liked from
Oh,
Baldur's Gate?
Karlach.
Is that no the femme one that you played as?
Oh, my character.
Maybe isn't the maybe
Yeah, I
it's
think it was
just
just my
tieflings in general.
character. Yeah,
Oh, it turns out
yeah,
I think your character's super hot. Boy, do I have hope
that's
for
true.
you.
She was very hot. Like it was a good
Yeah,
the
and
period where we played Baldur's Gate. Yeah, that was a
very briefly, for me at least, not my
yeah.
thing. Okay. Thank you, Christine, so much for joining us. I will make sure to put your social in the description, not your social security number, your social media
Oh.
handle, both.
Yeah, share social. No,
Yeah. And you can check us out at Real Hot Nerd Pod on Instagram and Facebook. And yeah, thanks for joining. We will
Spotify.
see you
Yeah.
next time.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.